So I guess every one of you have been handed over, right? This particular, yeah. So they mentioned 10 topics, 10 classes, but we will be completing in the next 5 days. So Saturday, you would not be having my class. So the economy sessions only for the 5 days. Okay. And that being the reason, I just want you to help me to compensate the Saturday session. And that's the reason I asked you to attend the session at 8 o'clock. And Saturday, you would not be having this session. Okay. Yes. And all 5 topics, okay, I mean 10 topics, 10 classes listed in that particular handout would be covered in the next 5 days, including today. Okay. Yes. So now coming back to the actual point of discussion we're having. So the thing is, we are right, okay, you all know the fact that anything that happens across any part of the world would more or less have some impact on Indian economy too. Am I right? Have you heard that right now many times, okay, people would say that the Indian economy, not only Indian economy, global economy is experiencing rapid deglobalization. Am I right? Why is Trump in news? Just because some random statement he happens to keep giving? No. Since Jan 20, he been saying the same thing. Tariff, tariff, tariff. Mexico, tariffs, Canada, tariffs, China, tariffs, doesn't matter. Isn't it? So I'm going to impose huge tariffs. So one or the other way. Isn't it? When it comes to our Prime Minister, he keeps using mostly demographic dividend. He is very happy because India is the country that receives world largest amount of remittances, young country with large proportion of young people. There's something to be feel being proud about it. But when it comes to Trump, the most frequently used term is tariffs. So what do you really think is the essence of imposing tariffs? What do you think he just want to achieve? You think that this man hates Chinese, is he is imposing tariffs? And he hates Canadians imposing tariffs? Then why? Why is he simply saying that every country, I'm going to impose huge tariffs? And he literally pointed out, especially BRICS nations. What does BRICS consist of? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Because 1-2 years back, these countries happens to come together with a proposal to use their currencies or come with an alternative reserve currency for a dollar. And he clearly pointed out, if you ever happen to speak about a currency other than dollar, or if you ever happens to come with a plan to replace a dollar as a reserve asset, then I'm going to impose 100% tariffs on. You guys getting it? So he's literally threatening every part of the world. Right? Right? And this term tariff is being the most frequently used term. But what do you mean by tariff? Or why is this man imposing tariffs at such a high level on every country? He has to, okay, isn't it? He means to achieve some purpose, right? So what purpose you think he would like to achieve by imposing tariffs? In what way it helps American economy? That's my question. If the president of US does something, it has to have some positive impact on American economy, right? And I think you know these two people, Elon Musk and Trump, together happens to coin this MAGA, Make America Great Again. Am I right? So look at it, one of the world's most sophisticated electronic gadgets. You're noticing, isn't it? Most of them happens to come from USA. US has been a pioneer in research, development, coming with sophisticated technological gadgets. But no longer US happens to have that basic mileage. Right now, China, isn't it? Yes or no? And there are times before 2000, Japan, isn't it? Now China, South Korea happen to surpass US in terms of innovation. Am I right? So now they want to make America great again. And one of the means to make America great again is by proposing huge tariffs. My question is, how come imposing tariffs on goods from India, China, Canada, Mexico, Europe would make America great? Yes, that's it. Because the very basic intention of imposing tariffs is to protect your domestic industry. Just keep the competition out. That's it. Because the Chinese, Indians has a relatively huge amount of natural resource. Not only natural resource, because US do also has been bestowed with very huge amount of natural resource. You will be surprised to know the world's largest producer of oil not any Middle East country. It's the US. But the problem they have is labor. Right? The labor price in India, the wages in India is much, much cheaper than compared to the wages in United States of America. And the advantage, the comparative advantage, US, okay, China and India has over US. We might not have capital on par with this particular US, but we have huge amount of labor. So that being the reason, if you just look at the goods that we export to United States of America are mostly labor-intensive goods. And India enjoys a trade surplus with USA. Matlab, our exports to United States of America in a year is more than the import of goods and services from United States of America. So it's literally threatening. Because your economy is heavily reliant upon my economy because you make money by selling goods and services. In case you come with a proposal ever in future to replace dollar as a reserve currency, then I'm going to impose huge tariffs. So that means, in a way, I'm going to discourage my people buying your goods and services. And don't you think that would hurt the Indian economy? Yes or no? It's not only Americans doing this. The Europeans, around 1-2 years back, they have come with this different idea. European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. Kabhi suna? CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. They say all of a sudden we realize the importance of carbon emissions. They simply said, isn't it? So these developing nations are exporting mostly carbon-intensive goods at cheaper prices, and henceforth, in order to discourage these countries, they have with the proposal that we're going to impose huge tariffs on those goods that results in huge emission of carbon dioxide, especially from developing countries. So somehow, okay, maybe the means could be different, but every major developed country across the world is resorting to the practice of imposing tariffs to protect and groom their domestic industry. So frankly speaking, the world is rapidly experiencing rapid deglobalization. You got it? So if every country happens to resort to its protectionist measures, don't you really think the overall international trade would come down? And that too when the world economy itself is experiencing a lot of challenges. One challenge is the Russia-Ukraine war. You know, when the war started, many experts have predicted the war would be completed in 2 weeks. Because Russia is a big country, Ukraine is a choti country, isn't it? 2 weeks mein Russia could finish Ukraine, everything would come normal. But it's more than 2 years. But the question I am asking you, how come Russia-Ukraine war would have an impact on the rest of the world? Maybe the neighboring countries would have an impact. Why do you really think the rest of the world has to pay the price because of Russia-Ukraine war? In what way? Yes? Export, import, what way? Pardon? Inflation. Why the world is experiencing high inflation? How do you explain this? Because you know that Russia and both Ukraine, okay, are large exporters of commodities, raw materials. In fact, like what Punjab, Haryana to India, football, is what Ukraine to the former USSR. They do also have fertile, okay, plains. You might have studied about grasslands, pampas, okay, prairies, steppes, the grasslands. And these grasslands in this part are so nutrient rich and they are very good for cultivation of wheat. It's not just wheat. Russia, you know, itna bada country, it has very huge resource of oil, gas and many minerals. You find it in Russia. And because of this long pending conflict between these two nations, what's happening? Dunia is experiencing a shortage of commodities, raw materials. And that resulted in inflation across all parts of the world that includes developing countries and also the advanced economies. You will be literally surprised to know the fact the inflation experienced by European nations and American countries in the last 2 years is the highest in the last 40 years. And that is purely due to supply constraints due to the long war between Russia and Ukraine. Getting it? So the average cost of production of most of the goods and services has gone up. The cost of production increases, that means the price of goods and services in the market obviously increases. That resulted in a very high rates of inflation. And I hope you understand and appreciate how bad inflation is. Okay, isn't it? Am I right? Because the price of every damn commodity that we consume increases, don't you really think the amount of goods that we could buy with our money could reduce? The overall demand in the economy happens to reduce. When the overall demand economy reduces, obviously the entire economy do experience a contraction. Do you guys accept it? Yes, just give me a second. Hello? Hello? Hi. नीचे नहीं चल के अभी वो तो छोड़ दे भैया उसको फिर भाई ओटीपी नहीं यार एक मिनट 7573 7573 Yeah. So the war has resulted in severe shortage of various commodities, and that has resulted in a very high rate of inflation. And I guess you understand the consequences of inflation, isn't it? Rarely if the price rise for a short period of time, TK chalta. But if the price or at a very high level for a longer span of time, obviously what happens? The consumption capacity of people reduces. Because increase in price of goods and services would literally mean fall in purchasing power of your currency. Am I right? So the basket of goods and services that you could buy with your amount of money that you earn would greatly reduce. And if that comes down, obviously what's going to happen? The total consumption capacity of the economy is reducing. Am I right? Yes or no? So look at last month, I could simply buy itna bada basket of goods with my 100 bucks. But because of increase in price, the same 100 rupees could only buy a basket of this size. Then don't you think every person in the economy experiencing a severe fall in his consumption capacity because the purchasing of power of money is rapidly eroding? Am I right? So when the demand in the economy contracts, don't you think that would have an impact on output and unemployment? Unemployment rises. Why would people like to sustain the same production when people doesn't have the affordability? Do you guys accept it? Following. So it's because of this high rate of inflation, across the globe, the global economy started experiencing a severe contraction, and that explains the reason why in the last 2-3 years we have the global economy growth somewhere stagnated around world growth rate around 3%. Am I right? You got it? So in spite of the world economy growth stagnated 3%, the advanced economy is somewhere around 1%. But how come India is reporting such a high growth? Got it? Yes. So let's try to understand. But one thing I hope you would be able to appreciate is, though Russia-Ukraine war is being prolonged for a long span of time, and dunya is experiencing, and dunya mein India is also gonna pay a certain amount of price. Am I right? Yes or no? Do you think Russia-Ukraine war also has an equal impact on Indian economy too? Or do you mean that India is immune to any global event that takes place outside India? No way, right? Yes or no? That's what's happening. Got it? So that's the reason. Before understanding the importance of budget of this year, you need to appreciate and understand the domestic challenges and the external challenges. And I have pointed out some external challenges. Am I right? So now, if you look at this is what I have pointed. Okay, so look at the growth rate. So during COVID, it's negative 5.8, and the year next to COVID, we've been reporting a decent growth rate. isn't it? But how many of you could recollect the formula for GDP? Let me see how many of you. So how do you write GDP? Can I simply, okay, I'll write the formula and let me know whether I'm right or wrong. Y equal to C plus I plus G plus. Come on, yeah. Is this the first time you have come across formula for GDP? Y equal to C plus I plus G plus NX stands for net exports. C stands for consumption expenditure of households. I stands for investment expenditure. G stands for government expenditure. NX that stands for exports minus imports. But rather writing C plus I plus G plus NX, let me put it in a different way. I'm just using some standard terminology. So rather than using C, which stands for consumption expenditure of households, I would write it as PFCE, which stands for private final consumption expenditure. Because this is the standard accounting terminology. Rather than using consumption expenditure of households, I am referring it as a PFCE, private final consumption expenditure. And then, okay, rather than G, I would write it as GFCE, government final consumption expenditure. Because if you open economic survey, IMF, World Bank, okay, any standard report, you don't find people using C, I, Z and all these things. People use certain standard notation. So PFCE stands for private final consumption expenditure. GFCE stands for government final consumption expenditure. Rather than I, we refer it as gross fixed capital formation. The investment expenditure or capital expenditure is what is referred as gross fixed capital formation. And then net exports. This is the most appropriate, okay, formula. And I don't mean this is wrong, but a better way of writing the same. Rather than C plus I plus G plus NX, it's always better to use PFCE. That's basically a standard accounting terminology. PFCE plus GFCE plus GFCF plus net exports. Summing these four components is what you get the output or the gross domestic product of a country in a given period of time. Out of all these four components, what do you think contributes more to Indian economy? GDP is sum of four components. One is private final consumption expenditure. Other is government final consumption expenditure. And I hope you understand what's the meaning of word final consumption expenditure. Consumer good, capital good. दोनों में फर्क क्या है? What's the difference? Consumer good, capital good. Consumer good, capital good. What's the difference? Huh? Capital goods. So capital goods are goods that are used in producing any other goods and services. So by that logic, can I call every machine? Because generally, if you occasion to produce any good, generally you might be employing some machines. Can I call every machine as a capital good? Is every machine can be called as a capital good? Because machines are used to produce other goods and services, isn't it? And that's what you're just explaining to me. Capital goods are goods that are used in producing other goods and services. Is that enough to define capital goods? By that logic, every machine which is used to produce other good should be a capital good. No. Then you just now said, okay, capital goods are basically those goods that are used in production of other goods. Let's say I have a copier, printer. Okay, let's say you yourself have a copier, printer, some LaserJet printer at your home, and that is used to take some printouts. Can that machine be called as a capital good? Huh? I said I don't understand sign language. Either say yes, no. No. Then how do you define a capital good? Abhi to bola na aapne. Okay, goods that are used to produce other goods, and this printer you used to produce printouts, or I could just publish books using this copier. Then why don't you call it a capital good? As per your definition, it should be a capital good, right? Okay, I'm not asking you what's the difference durable and non-durable good. I didn't ask you what's the meaning of a durable good. Capital goods by default more or less are durable goods. But what do you mean by capital good? And as per your explanation, every good that is used to produce other good would end up becoming a capital good. So by your logic, every machine should be a capital good. A printer at your home. So TK, is there a, let's suppose opposite to your organization, there is a big shop where the gentleman happens to sell printouts, photocopies. That printer he has, that machine, is that a capital good? Imagine the same machine is what you have at your home. Okay, can that be called as a capital good? The same machine is what you have at your home. Can you call it as a capital good? No. It's the same machine, beta. Then why? Very good. Data. So that is being used to produce a good which is intended for a sale in the market. There's some economic activity being taking place. Some value addition is what the gentleman is doing, and that's simply he's monetizing it. Yes or no? He's making money by selling the final good. But in this case, whatever the good that you happen to produce using that machine at your home is not meant for any resale. Am I right? It's for your final consumption. In one way, the other way. Am I clear now? So that machine or that copy at your home is a consumer good. But the same machine with that guy is a capital good. Understood now? Okay. But to take a printout, you need to buy paper. He need to buy a paper. Now tell me, how would you categorize that paper? The paper you buy and the paper he buys. To take a printout, you need paper, sir. You accept it, and that guy has to buy paper. You should also happen to buy a paper. And how do you categorize and what do you call this paper you buy and what do you call the paper he buys? Consumer good. And that paper he buys is what you call capital good. Huh? Okay. Yes? So that paper you are buying is still a final consumer good. Got it? Got it. But that paper he is buying to take a printout and sell the final copy. What is he selling? A printed copy. Isn't it? And we call that paper he buys as an intermediate good. As an intermediate good. Don't worry, I will again revise when I discuss about GDP topic. But I hope at least you understand what's the meaning of word capital goods. Not every machine is a capital good. You understand at least that? TK. So now coming back, out of these four components, what contributes more to GDP? Because GDP is the sum of four components. In Charome, what contributes more to GDP? PFCE, GFCE, GFCF, net exports. Or you tell me net exports, positive or negative? Net exports ka matlab hai total exports of India minus total imports of India. Positive or negative? Okay, negative. So from this, you are subtracting something. So henceforth, let's ignore this. Out of these three, what contributes more? Huh? PFC, very good, fantastic. Okay, you know, on an average, the contribution to GDP, PFC, because India has a very large middle class population, our consumption capacity is very huge. So roughly around 60% of component of GDP is a PFC. What next? Yes, sir? Yeah, louder. Come on. Yes. The next major component happens to be GFCF, gross fixed capital formation. That means it's literally translates to investment expenditure. And that investment could be made by private sector or that investment could be made by government. But in total, the next major component happens to be GFCF, investment expenditure. Got it? So does mean any increase in any of these components would result in an increase in GDP. Do you guys accept it? Yes or no? Increase in any of these components would result in increase in GDP. And increase in, there is a growth rate ka matlab hai, one of these components or all the components might experiencing a rise. Maybe it's because of investment expenditure rise. Maybe it is because of consumption expenditure rise by government or private sector or increase in exports. Isn't it? So increase in GDP could happen because of increase in any of these four components. You accept it? If there is more consumption of goods and services, definitely that results in more production. Am I right? Similarly, more investment expenditure Isn't it? That means more assets are being created, more output being produced in that country in that respective year. You accept it? Understood? So increase in any of these components would result in increase in GDP. And now my question to all of you is, in spite of world economy experiences sluggish growth, what could be the probable reason that India reporting a decent growth rate of around 6.5% even after COVID? Is primarily due to a huge amount of investment spending by the government of India. So the primary driver of economic growth of India in the last 3-4 years especially is enormous rise and increase in capital expenditure, especially by government of India. Okay, let me show you the expenditure made, okay, the capex. So look at this, 2021, the capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is expenditure made by, okay, expenditure made on capital, creation of capital, simply investment, is 2.1% of GDP. But now it has gone up to 3.2% of GDP. So you might think it's just simply 1.1%. But 1.1% of GDP, is a very huge number, right? What's the GDP of India as of now? Come on, what's the size of Indian GDP? Yes? $3.9 trillion. $3.9 trillion. Okay, and you just express in terms of rupees, it's around 280 lakh crore rupees of money. इसमें 3.2, 2.1 से 3 साल के पहले, now we have increased it to 3.2%. So if you want in terms of, okay, so if you look at, here is the total expenditure, capital expenditure. Just look at the capital expenditure, blue one, and I will explain what's the meaning of the word grants rate. If you look at the capital expenditure of Union government alone, it is 11.2 lakh crores. 11.2 lakh crores this year. And just look at 5 years, okay, 6-7 years back. It was, okay, somewhere around 2.8, 3.1. Somewhere from 2.8 lakh crore, roughly around 3 lakh crore, it's now has gone up to 12 lakh crore. So 4-fold rise in the span of hardly 4-5 years. So it has been, what's the major contributor to Indian economic growth in the last 4-5 years is heavy spending by government on infrastructure. To spend such a huge money, the government might also need to borrow more money because our government doesn't have the responsibility of only spending money in infrastructure, because India being a welfare state, the government of India also has other obligations. That is in the name of welfare spending. Yes or no? In the name of food security, in the name of subsidizing fertilizers, in the name of subsidizing fuel. Am I right? Isn't it? The social assistance programs like pensions, the government of India is bestowed with enormous responsibilities. India being a welfare state. And that itself is going to cost lakhs of crores of rupees of money to government. In spite of it, the government in the last 4 years has gone for enormous rise in its capital expenditure. Matlab hai? That itself conveys the fact the state has no other obligation, okay, other option other than borrowing a good amount of money. You accept it? Understood? So what's primarily driving Indian economic growth in the last 3-4 years is increase in investment, and especially this investment expenditure is coming from government of India. So what is the problem in this case? So more spending by government would definitely result in more output, crowding in effect. But since the government is spending a good amount of money, mostly by resorting to borrowing money, it's also resulting in crowding out effect. And that explains the reason you would be noticing the fact, okay, the investment expenditure in India is going up. But within this investment, a large part of investment is from government, and literally the private sector investment in the last 3-4 years, literally after COVID, has remained stagnant. And why is the investment by private sector in India has remained stagnant? What do you think could be the reason? One reason I already pointed out, sluggish global demand. Do you accept it? Yes or no? Dunia mein demand, okay, isn't it? Sluggish global demand because of sluggish global growth rate. Am I right? Yes or no? If you are an Indian entrepreneur, why would you like to increase your production? Because there are hardly any country which is having decent demand, and if there is no demand for your goods, obviously you don't have an incentive to increase your output. So one primary reason is sluggish global demand. That too, you are an export-oriented producer, then there is no point in increasing because dunya itself is experiencing stagnation in economic growth. Am I right? That's one reason. Sluggish global demand. Am I right? Yes or no? Yes. And the second major reason is not only sluggish global demand, not good amount of increase in domestic demand too. Got it? Moreover, the major challenge is the crowding out effect. Crowding out effect. The reason, whatever the money that's available, the government itself is borrowing. Too much of borrowing by the government is resulting in increased interest rates, and that is disincentivizing, isn't it, the private sector investments. Why? Why would I need to take a risk of borrowing money at high rates to increase my production when the global demand and domestic demand more or less remained stagnant? Why would I take risk? Got it? Moreover, I guess most of you also be aware of the fact, since May 2022, the RBI in India, okay, has been increasing interest rate. When I say interest rate, repo rate, since May 22. So somewhere in COVID, during COVID, the RBI has cut down the repo rate to around 4%. Not only RBI has done this, every central bank across all the economies, they happen to bring down their policy rates. That includes RBI. But since May 2022, in order to contain the increasing inflation rates, every central bank started increasing interest rates. And you'll be noticing the fact, almost for the last 2 years, the interest rate in India, the repo rate or policy rate has been kept at a very high rate, 6.5%. And I guess you might also be aware of the fact, the repo rate, also called policy rate, in fact benchmark policy rate. Why is it called repo rate? Why is repo rate called benchmark policy rate? What's the meaning of the word benchmark policy rate? Very good. More or less every interest rate in the economy more or less happens to be benchmark. That means the repo rate in the economy acts like a reference. Got it? You would be, okay, can you recollect the term external benchmark lending rate, EBLR? Benchmarking has been a reference. MCLR, EBLR, external benchmarking, internal benchmarking. You might have studied this in banking. So literally speaking, if the repo rate increases, it is quite obvious the interest rates in the economy or the rate at which the banks lend money are going to rise. If the policy rate or what you call the repo rate decreases, it is expected that the rate at which the banks are going to lend money is expected to decrease. Because as of now, the lending rates of banks are linked to the repo rate. So the repo rate more or less acts as a reference point. So in case the central bank increases repo rate, it is quite obvious in India. That's the reason you would be coming across in newspaper. The day or 2 days later after the RBI announces its policy rate, you would also notice the banks reviewing or revising their lending rates. If it increases policy rate, the banks are expected to rise their interest rate. If it decreases, the banks are expected to cut down their interest rate. Since the repo rate, the rate at which the RBI lends money to banks to meet their short-term requirement, has been kept very high. Moreover, because of the crowding out effect, there's been a huge shortage of liquidity in the economy. Why would a private sector would have any incentive to borrow money and invest money? Am I clear now? So that being the reason, the government has taken the primary responsibility of spending lot of money in infrastructure. But to spend such a huge sum of money, the government also need to borrow a lot of money. But do you really think government spending alone would help in sustaining the Indian economic growth? Do you think it's practically possible that government spending alone would help sustaining Indian economic growth for a longer span of time? No, right? In a market-dominated economy like India, definitely the market forces, private sector investment has to rise. You guys getting it? Yes or no? So when would a private investor would be happy investing? Either he would have the gut feeling that he is going to make good amount of money for every penny he invested. Am I right? Yes or no? Isn't it? If he happens to have the gut feeling, yes, every penny I invest in this country is going to make me, okay, good amount of money, isn't it? Returns on the capital invested. And when would you think that investors should have that feeling? Is when the economy is sustaining a decent growth. When there is more output being produced, more income being generated, more spending is taking place, am I right, resulting in more demand, then definitely every investor would have a develop, okay, isn't there a perception that yes, in this economy, by investing money, I'm going to make a good amount of money. You guys accept it? So for that to happen, the state has to ensure better ease of doing business. You accept it? Not only self the belief that I would make more money, and also ensure, okay, the state should also ensure, isn't it, relatively availability of capital at a cheaper prices. Isn't it? And what is primarily deterring the private investors investing in India right now is lack of global demand. Lack of enough demand in the domestic economy. At the same time, the major problem is very high cost of capital. Then how do you ensure there will be enough liquidity would be available in the economy? And how do you sustain the economy growth? By incentivizing private sectors would invest and expand their business. That's a very basic logic why the government of India, this budget, has thought of providing a tax rebate. But how come? How do you relate tax rebate up to 12 lakhs to increase in private investments? Huh? Yes, very good. So the logic is, like this gentleman says, the logic is very simple. If the government of India reduces the tax burden, if the tax burden reduces, it's as simple as that. Let's suppose, imagine Saket is making some money. Saket happens to make some money. 10 lakhs, 12 lakhs, doesn't matter. So what do you think is Saket going to do with this money? In what different ways he's going to make use of this money? Some amount of money Saket happens to make, he spends on Saket, right? Some amount of money he makes, he spends on consumption. It could be on necessities, it could be on wants, it could be on luxuries, doesn't matter. Some money is meant for a consumption. It could be necessity. It could be on comforts. It could be on luxuries, doesn't matter. Some money he spends. And some money he has to end up paying taxes. After meeting his consumption requirement, after paying taxes, and if he's still left with some extra penny, that what's turned to become a savings. Am I right? You accept it. And generally, the money, if you look at it, not all money you earn is what you could spend it for yourself. Not all money you earn is your disposable income. Am I right? So what is the income that is at your disposal is the money that you are left with after paying the compulsory payment to the state. That is what is called a tax. Isn't it? The rest of the money is at your disposal. You accept it? Isn't it? In a country where the tax rates are abnormally high, the disposable income of the people reduces. Am I right? Basically, disposable income does mean the total income minus compulsory payments like tax payments you make to the state. Got it? So in a country where the taxes are abnormally high, obviously disposable income of the people reduces. If the disposable income of the people reduces, then definitely the consumption spending reduces. Savings would also reduce. But again, if I happen to reduce this tax rate, I'm not simply eliminating it. If I reduce your tax burden, what would be the consequence of reducing the tax burden? It results in increase in disposable income. So now people have more money to spend. And what do you think that people are going to do with this money? They either happens to spend more on consumption, or they either would increase your savings. More savings in the market, more savings economy would result in increase in more liquidity. Do you accept it? More funds to lend. You accept it? More money, more savings. Don't you think that will bring down the interest rates? You accept it? Simultaneously, more demand because people's consumption capacity is increasing because they're left with more money in hands because the government said, I'm not going to take good amount of your money as a tax. So the impact of bringing this tax rebate is it increases consumption, it also increases savings, would ultimately incentivizes the private sector investment. And in a country like India where market forces relatively dominant economy, until unless the private sector investment catches up, the Indian economy cannot sustain its growth. It doesn't mean the government has made its point to reduce its spending. इसी वजह से if you look at last year का investment expenditure planned 11 lakh crore. This year it is still around 11.2 lakh crore. Last year का expected, okay, the government has budgeted 11,11,101 crore as its capital expenditure. And in this budget, literally 11.2 lakh crore is what the government has budgeted for infrastructure spending. इसका मतलब है I would keep my spending high. Because for a country like India, which is aspiring to be a rich economy, right, a developed economy, would create a decent quality of infrastructure. Do you accept it? Do you think infrastructure is a major bottleneck in India, in the growth of India? You accept it? Name any major city, any major metropolitan city. They're badly known for two reasons. Summer May, you don't have water to drink. 2 centimeters of rainfall, they turn to become Venice. Venice, matlab, I don't literally mean as beautiful as Venice. You cannot at least move on the roads. All right, you need to leave your car, take a boat. 2 centimeters rainfall, monsoon season. Mumbai, Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore, name any city. They turn to become like Venice. Summer May, no water to drink. Isn't it? I'm not just simply speaking only with respect to it. Name anything. For that matter, congestion on the roads. Say that? Yes or no? So, okay, every part of India has experienced this problem. And don't you really think for India to really become a global power and to become a developed country, a good amount of investment in infrastructure is mandatory and there's no compromise on it. And who could afford to invest? Only government. That's major responsibility of the state. So, without me compromising, isn't it? How would I incentivize private sector? Because unless the private sector investment catches up, I cannot sustain growth. Unless I sustain growth, I cannot reach my target of pehle $5 trillion economy and then becoming a $30 trillion economy. You got it now? So that being the fundamental reason why the government has now thought of incentivizing private spending by cutting down the tax burden. I hope you understood. Okay? Yes. And other things that the government or other initiatives as part of budget is something I would share it with you. You don't need to worry. So now let's come back. So I think I have asked the same question, or you obviously revealed this. So this is basically the contribution of those 4 components to GDP. Rather than NX, I have listed it as exports and imports. And you could notice the exports yellow and imports the other if you create, right, light blue. So I hope roughly around 60% is the contribution of PFCE, and the next major contribution happens to be by GFCF, which stands for Gross Fixed Capital Formation, Investment Expenditure. Next comes the government, okay, isn't it? And the net exports, always negative. Understood? And if you notice somewhere from 22, first half, H1 stand for first half, H2 stand for second half. What part of the year corresponds to H1? April to September. What generally people refer as a slack season. Second half in India we refer as a busy season. Slack season, busy season. First half, second half. And those halves further divided into 2 quarters each. Am I right? So in which quarter? I mean the March month falls in which quarter? Huh? 4th quarter. Am I right? Yes. Now again imagine, so since we are in 4th quarter, if someone says, let's say if tomorrow you happen to come across in the media that the 3rd quarter Q3 of financial year 24-25 reported a growth rate of 5%. So let's say 8%. Let's make it 5 seems to be too less. Let's make it 8%. The 3rd quarter, which part of the year corresponds to 3rd quarter? October, November, December of last calendar year, right? The 3rd quarter of 24-25 report, okay, growth rate of 8%. How do you explain this? How do you explain this? Yes. Yes. So it simply does mean compared to the same period of last financial year. So compared to Q3 of 23-24, the output in this period, in this particular financial year, has gone up by 8%. So the Q3 output is not compared with the previous quarter. It's compared with the same period of last year. You guys getting it? It's as simple as that. Let's say you have come across a news that the month of Feb experienced inflation of 6%, retail inflation of 6%. Got it? And that's one reported in the month of March. So how do you explain this? The Feb month, the February month of 25 experienced inflation rate of 6%. How do you explain this? मतलब क्या है? What do you mean by it? It simply does mean the price of a certain basket of goods and services. When I say retail inflation, I am referring to CPI based inflation. The price of certain basket of goods and services, not all goods and services. Because India mein no one is worried about change in price of every commodity. Am I right, sir? Are you people bothered about change in price of Mercedes Benz? Yes, BMW, PSLV, GSLV. Not everything produced in this country, their price change is something that bothers us. What bothers us? Change in price of clothing, housing, isn't it? It's or no? Okay, milk, meat, onion, egg, tomato, a certain basket of goods and services. We're not concerned about change in price of every commodity. We're only concerned about change in price of those goods and those services where we spend good part of our money. You accept it, sir? Isn't it? Are you guys really worried about change in price of Ferrari? No, it doesn't bother us. Because what part of our spending is on Ferrari and how frequent do you buy Ferrari? Isn't it? We only concern about change in price of, especially agar South India, we are concerned about change in price of rice, change in price of dal. You guys getting it? So that's what it matters. So this simply says the increase in price of certain basket of goods and services in the month of February in 25 has gone up by 6% in comparison to the month of February in 24. एक साल का पहले the basket cost 100 and this year to buy the same basket it costs you 106 rupees. Same thing holds good with this. The third quarter of 24-25 reported a 8% growth. That's mean compared to the output of 23-24 in the same period, the output has gone up by 8%. Am I clear now? So we always just compare with a lag of 1 year. I mean with a difference of 1 year. Am I clear now? So next month April, if they report the March month of inflation, it has been compared to the price of March last year. Isn't it? The price in this particular March has gone up by some X%. Am I clear? Yes. So I think now you could understand what majorly contributes to the Indian economy out of these four components. So now let's come back to where we started. So you answered this question? Okay? Yes. And now answer this question. Which one of the following statements appropriately describes the word fiscal stimulus? Fiscal stimulus. Remember I said the state and the RBI together could influence demand. Any act of the government or RBI to boost demand, we call it an expansionary policy. Any deliberate act of the central bank or the government to reduce the demand, we call it a contractionary policy. Expansionary policy, contractionary policy. So an expansionary policy of government would result in boosting demand. What could you do to boost demand if you being the finance minister? You could either increase your expenditure, reduce the tax burden. Am I right? Isn't it? If this summer the government of Telangana proposes to bring down the excise duty on beer, 0, what happens? Forget about it. From tomorrow you don't come to class. Why? Even though you come to class, you cannot concentrate. Am I right? Yes. Hangover. That's a joke. Okay, TK, you get what I mean to say? Things become cheaper. So that's how it could just boost demand, either cutting down taxes or increasing expenditure. Expansionary policy, fiscal policy. Or the other way, the central bank could boost demand is bring down the interest rates. Yes or no? Many times you might be noticing on the hoardings or simply the billboards where banks advertise home loan available at 6%. Why are they advertising that home loan is at 6%? What's the intention behind advertising that home loan available at 6%? I simply say that it's very, isn't it cheaper to buy a home? The reason is I'm just charging 6%, and that interest of 6% is an annual rate of interest. That means your 100 bucks borrowed will only attract 6% rate of interest. So 6 rupees per annum, it's hardly 50 paise for 100 rupees per month. Got it? So, इतना सस्ता में loan मिल रहा है, why don't you just go borrow and buy a home, buy a property? Don't you think decrease in interest rates would incentivize people to borrow and spend, borrow and invest? Do you accept it? But the same thing, opposite happens when I increase the interest rate, discourages people to spend, rather encourages people to save. You accept it? You guys getting it? That's it. So any action of either central bank or the government of India that boosts demand is what we call expansionary policy. That contains the demand is contractionary policy. So we are going to discuss about monetary policy in the next class, but let's today focus on fiscal policy. Got it? So how would you define out of these four statements what appropriately describes the statement fiscal stimulus? Make it fast. Stimulating. Okay, in the break, I guess you might have had a cup of coffee, tea. Some of you might have a smoke. कुछ तो बोलो यार. Respond. At least you have a coffee. Do you guys take coffee? Chai? No, nothing. At least you drink water. Okay. Okay, so generally, why would people have coffee, tea in the break? It has to serve some purpose, right? Just for the sake of having it, people don't have it, right? Isn't it? It has to serve some. Why do people smoke? Huh? मजा आता है. क्या मजा आता है? Relief. Smoke gives you relief. Okay. No, why do people smoke? Or why do people have coffee? Very good. Isn't it? Stimulates. What does it stimulate, sir? Your nervous system. Very good. Isn't it? So coffee has caffeine in it. Isn't it? Similarly, cigarette, nicotine. And that stimulates your thirst. You will be more active. So just before you hit gym, better to have a coffee. Or soon after you wake up, better to have a coffee. Okay, isn't it? So it stimulates your nervous system. You become more active. But it's not advised to have a cup of coffee before going to bed. Why? वो तो active हो गया. How does it go to rest? Isn't it? Right? Got it? So that's it. So I hope now you understand the literal meaning of the word stimulus. Isn't it? And what out of these four statements would literally explain the statement called fiscal stimulus? B. Bangalore. It's an intense affirmative action of government to boost economic activity in the country. Any affirmative action. What could be that affirmative action? Increase your spending. Allocate more for NRGA, more for Food Security Act. I mean, any increase in spending by government puts more money in the hands of people, results in increase in demand. Do you guys accept it? What else the other way to boost demand in the economy? Cut down the taxes. Would you accept it? Yes. And that's what is the meaning of the word fiscal stimulus. Am I clear now? Very good. Now answer this question. So you explain me what's the fiscal stimulus and how could you stimulate the economy, or how could you boost demand in the economy? What could be done? Cutting tax rates. Will that help? Can that be called as a stimulus? Will that stimulate your economy? Very good. Increase in government spending? Yes or no? Yes. And third, abolishing subsidies in the context of economic recession. Recession does mean generally the Technical definition of recession has been any economy experiencing negative growth, negative, for 2 consecutive quarters is said to experience a recession. And if that gets prolonged for a longer span of time, we simply call it a depression. It's as simple as that. Your neighbor loses job, you could call recession. You lose job, depression. It's relative. Right? Technically, any economy experiences negative growth for 2 consecutive quarters. The economy is set to experience recession. At a time when the economy is experiencing recession, there has been fall in output, which results in rise in unemployment. And if the government now proposes to cut down the subsidies, spending, don't you think it's like rubbing salt to the wound? More painful, am I right? So can you call it a stimulus? No, it's the opposite. Isn't it? Yes or no? That's it. So what's the appropriate answer? 1 and 2. A. Very good. Yes. So I think I didn't use the word revenue and capital, but let me see. Before going ahead with the budget, let me explain. Let me see how many of you could answer this. Okay, we're going to revisit if you want, but before me giving the explanation, because if I explain and then ask you a question, it's very easy for you. It's a revision. 1 only. What's wrong with 2? What's wrong with 2? Huh? It's a revenue. Okay. TK. And then equity financing? Capital expenditure. Okay. So, TK, of course, you're right. But what do you think is the difference between revenue and capital? In fact, the reason I asked the question is how do you differentiate? Because if you look at the budget, can be broadly divided into 2 different components. Can be divided into 2 different components. Revenue component and a capital component. I mean, the budget could be classified into revenue budget, capital budget. Revenue, capital budget. Got it? And that could be further classified into 2 subcomponents. Inflow, outflow. Okay, and that inflow is what I call revenue receipt, inflow. Revenue, expenditure, outflow. The same thing holds good with capital, receipt, capital, expenditure, which is again outflow. So this is how I could just simply divide the budget. Into 2 broad components, revenue and capital component, which could further be classified into revenue receipt, revenue expenditure. Capital receipt, capital expenditure. One is inflow, one is outflow. So receipt expenditure is self-explanatory, inflow, outflow. But how would you classify a transaction to revenue transaction or a capital transaction? Don't give me example. Just tell me the criteria. Pardon? Okay. Accrues for more than 12 months, you call it as a? Okay. Anything more? Any other way? I just want a very simple term that could help in classifying a transaction or categorizing into revenue or capital. Simple logic is the recurring transactions. Recurring matlab? Recurring. That keeps repeating with a certain regular interval. Isn't it? Maybe monthly, quarterly, isn't it? So anything that repeats, you classify as a revenue transaction. Non-recurring transactions, we classify as a capital. But that's it. Or any transaction that influence your assets, liabilities. It results in either rise in assets, fall in liabilities, fall in assets, rise in anything that influences assets and liabilities. We classify as a capital. Anything that influences your income expenses, income and expenditures, we classify as a. So, simple thing, the simple logic, if things seems to be. Anyway, we're going to discuss about current account, capital account, wherein I will go more or less use the same logic. As of now, just remember the recurring, non-recurring. Because when it comes to capital transactions, they would result in influencing or change in your assets and liabilities. Got it? Okay, let's suppose the state has allocated some funds to construct a hospital. Is it expenditure or receipt? Deepika, the state has, okay, your chief minister has allocated some 500 crores for construction of a AIMS like hospital. Is it an expenditure or receipt to the state? Huh? Expenditure. Is it revenue expenditure or capital expenditure? Huh? Capital. Why? Huh? It's a non-recurring, right? Isn't it? Non-recurring. Yes or no? Do you think your chief minister is going to spend every year? Okay, no. Once in blue moon, these good things happen. But अगर एक hospital है तो you should maintain it better. Yes or no? Yes or no? अगर if you already own a hospital, if you already have an existing infrastructure, don't you think it's your responsibility to maintain it? इसके लिए थोड़ा पैसा चाहिए ना? And that expenditure to maintain the hospital, where would you place it? Revenue or capital? Revenue. Got it now? Understood? The recurring, non-recurring. So that's how you could classify budget into revenue, capital, which could be further classified into receipts and expenditure. Revenue receipts, revenue expenditure, capital receipts and capital expenditure. Okay, but rather than in India, rather than using this kind of classification, what we generally do is we classify into receipts and we classify it into generally receipts and expenditure. Generally, the common practice is we classify the budget into receipts and expenditure. And you know, according to Article 112 of Indian Constitution, the expenditure has to be, it's mandatory to classify it into revenue, recurring and non-recurring expenditure. Because the revenue expenditure is like expenses, the operating expenses. But the capital expenditure results in creation of assets. And it is mandatory as per the Constitution. According to Article 112, the expenditure should be classified into revenue expenses, capital expenses. On the same lines, in India, we follow the same practice of dividing the receipts again into revenue receipt and capital receipt. So this is generally how we happen to categorize our budget. Receipt side, expenditure side. You understand now? Yes. Let's look at the receipt side of the budget and then we look at the expenditure side of the budget. Am I clear? Yes. So I think, okay, so I'll explain what's the meaning of this word. Okay, so look at the blue. This is a bar chart or line chart? Ignore the red line. Bar chart. Isme the blue component corresponds to the capital expenditure. And the yellow one is grants in aid for creation of capital assets. Matlab kya hai? I would explain. Together is basically what we call effective capital expenditure, which comes from the union government's pocket. Got it? So generally is to implement various welfare schemes. The union government has to allocate some funds to the states on a regular basis. And these funds allocated by union to the states to implement various programs is generally carried as part of revenue expenditure of the union government. But some of this expenditure would end up creating some capital assets. So I mean that grants the union provides to states, which is especially meant for creation of capital assets. When I say grant, it does mean you don't need to give it back. Yes or no? It's not a loan, it's a grant. So those grants the union offers to the states that are especially meant for creation of capital assets. Isn't it? So it does mean this part of the money comes from my pocket. So whatever the money I spend on creation of capital assets plus the money I offer to the states to creation of capital assets together is what we call effective capital expenditure. You got it? So this is the expenditure made directly by union government. This is the expenditure made by states on capital expenditure, which is offered in the form of grant by the union to the states. Am I right? So that's the meaning of the word effective capital expenditure. And both come from the same pocket. Consolidated Fund of India. Got it? Yes. Now, having understood the revenue and capital components, what do you think is an answer for this question? Hmm? Which of the following are included in the capital budget of Government of India? Huh? One only. Make it fast. 1 and 2. Which of the following is or included in capital budget of the Government of India? I mean, which out of these three transactions are non-recurring? That's the simplest way to look at it. Expenditure on acquisition of assets like road, building, machinery. Is that a capital expenditure or capital or revenue transaction? Expenditure or income? Expenditure, receipt. Expenditure, right? CapEx. In short form, we could write it as a CapEx, investment on infrastructure. Am I right? Yes. Second one, देखो, loans received from foreign governments. Loans received. Is loan basically loan? When you borrow, receipt or expenditure? Receipt. Is it recurring or non-recurring? Huh? Non-recurring. So maybe you might be thinking that every year we keep borrowing, but ideally you are not expected. It is not supposed. Yes or no? Do you borrow from your friends every month? Ideally you are not supposed to. Yes or no? If you are borrowing from your friends every month, kuch to gadbad hai. Rather than concentrating on what you are supposed to, you are doing something else. Yes or no? So revenue or capital transaction? Capital. Receipt or expenditure? Okay. Look at loans and advances granted to states and union territories. The loans I provide to states. Capital, okay, capital transaction, revenue transaction. Capital. Inflow, outflow. Okay, receipt or expenditure? Expenditure. So how many of these three components are revenue okay, capital components? Isn't it? That's it. And now let's look at the receipt side of the budget. Receipt side of the budget. So when people use the word receipt, okay, it simply does mean when I say, okay, let me make it receipt, okay, does mean more or less, okay, I'm just oversimplifying it, income plus borrowings. Or receipts can be classified. I mean, this is, okay, I said as I'm oversimplifying it. But the appropriate classification receipt is the receipt that doesn't create liability and that receipt that doesn't create any liability. So the most appropriate classification is debt creating receipt. I mean, anything that results in a liability. And non-debt creating receipt. This is the, okay, most appropriate format. One creates a debt, the other doesn't create a debt. I mean, what results in liability, the other doesn't result in liability. So any inflow that doesn't result in liability, ka matlab hai, you could just pocket it out. This was, I'm just simply referring it as income. Got it? Following. So we classify the receipt into debt creating receipt, non-debt creating receipt. Isn't it? But to make things simple, let's just call this as income and this as a borrowing. Got it? And that, okay, either it's a debt creating or non-debt creating, could be recurring or non-recurring. Does mean it could be revenue or it could be capital. It could be recurring or it could be non-recurring. Am I clear now? Now, let's quickly make out receipts. And I said it could be revenue receipt. It could be capital receipt. Am I right? Isn't it? And when it comes to revenue receipt, I would, prefer classifying this into tax revenue and non-tax revenue. Tax revenue, non-tax revenue, anything that recurs which is a tax revenue. And that receipts which is recurring and not in the form of tax, I'm calling it a non-tax revenue. And the tax revenue could be further classified into direct taxes and indirect taxes. So how do you classify tax as a direct or indirect tax? What's the criteria? Burden. Very good. So if the tax levied on you and the tax burden is also on you, the tax is on you, you have the responsibility to pay the tax. But in case you could pass on the burden, so the tax is levied on you, but the tax incidence or the burden is something you could pass on to the other party, then the tax becomes a indirect tax. Look at the organization is the service provider. Since we being the one who is providing service, we are liable to pay the GST. We are liable to pay the GST. Are we paying the GST from our pockets? No, we are just collecting it from the one who consumes the service we are providing it. The taxes and the service we are providing. And the service provider is the one responsible to pay the tax to the government, but the burden is on the consumer of the service. Am I clear now? But when it comes to income tax, the one who earns money within that particular bracket, he is the one liable to pay tax from his own pocket. You got it now? So when it comes to indirect tax, the tax levy, tax incidence or burden, it differs. Direct tax, they both happens to be in the same entity. Got it? Direct tax, indirect tax. So give me some examples of direct taxes. Okay, I'll write some taxes. You tell me whether it's a direct or indirect tax. Income tax. Direct or indirect tax? Direct. Personal income tax. Corporate tax. Corporate tax. Corporate tax. Tax on corporate profits. Direct or indirect? Okay, you people are playing very smart. A for direct and B for indirect. A or B? वही बोल दो. Corporate tax. Wealth tax. Wealth tax simply tax on income. Wealth मतलब income accumulated. Tax on income accumulated. Of course, as of now, India, we don't have a tax by name wealth tax. But since in India we are experiencing an increasing income inequalities, there are some people who happens to now propose why not bring in wealth tax. So collect tax from those people who accumulate more wealth, more income every year, take some part of their wealth and distribute back to the people. Because the very basic essence of tax, why do the king happens to levy tax? What's the essence of levying tax? Redistribute income. Ideally, the king is supposed to collect tax to redistribute income from rich to poor. That's the basic reason. That's the reason you might have come across this man. Okay, kabhi suna Enam Kautilya and his great work Ardhasastra. He compares taxation mechanism with the water cycle. The clouds has to collect water from collect moisture from the water body and precipitate in those areas that are devoid of enough water resource. That's what the king is supposed to do. Collect money from the rich. Because the very basic essence of tax is to redistribute income. So wealth tax. Okay, direct or indirect tax? Yes. Okay, gift tax. Tax on gifts received. In India, if you receive a gift worth more than 50,000 rupees, you are liable to pay tax on the gifts received. A or B? Okay. Estate duty, also called as inheritance tax. I mean, when he inherit property, even that was abolished now, no longer. But there is there are some people who propose to bring it back. Direct or indirect tax? Yeah. Just now, okay, before the break, I explained about windfall tax. A or B? Windfall tax, tax on windfall gains upon the corporate profits. Yes? Very good. Okay? Yes. And then security transaction tax. Security transaction tax does mean, how do you explain security transaction tax? I mean, on every transaction that you make in stock markets, either you buy a security. Security is a very general term, refers to any kind of financial asset. It could be share, it could be debenture, it could be anything, any financial asset that is traded in markets. We call it as a security, a broad term. You know, in India, if you just buy or sell any asset, any transaction, you buy a share, you're liable to pay security transaction tax. You're also liable to pay GST. You're also liable to pay stamp duty. Like when you buy an asset, you go to the registrar and pay stamp duty, registration tax. Similarly, even when you buy a financial asset, you need to get it registered. So that's the reason every time you buy a share, you end up buying paying security transaction tax. You also end up paying some money in the form of stamp duty because you are buying an asset. You also pay some GST, service being provided, right? Got it? And some brokers also collect broker fee. Am I clear? Similarly, when you sell the asset, the share you happen to buy, you are again liable to pay the security transaction tax. Because you're just making a transaction. Whether you're selling at profit or selling at loss doesn't matter. Every time you make a transaction, you're liable to pay tax. Security transaction tax. In case you bought it at 100 rupees, sold it at 200 rupees, since you made a gains, you're liable to pay a tax called capital gains tax. Capital gains tax. Gains realized on the capital invested. You bought an asset at 100 rupees. You happen to sell it at 200 rupees. And there's a money you made. Am I right? Yes or no? The gains realized. You keep the asset forever. You're not liable to pay. But you realize some gains by selling it, liquidating it. And upon the gains you make, you're liable to pay a tax. That is what is called capital gains tax. Is that a direct or indirect tax? Direct. Got it? So now I hope, okay, isn't it? So we discussed about some 6 or 7 taxes. Sales tax. Sales tax simply does mean tax levied on intra-state sale of goods within the state on any sales made. Generally, sales tax. Yes. Excise duty. Excise duty. Duty levied on the goods produced within the domestic territory. Direct or indirect? ARB. Customs duty. Export duty. What is a customs duty? What's the meaning of the word customs duty? Okay, basically customs duty broadly comprises both export and import duty. Export duty, direct or indirect tax? ARB. Import duty? Import duty? ARB. Okay, yes. Kabhi suna Tobin tax? Tobin tax is a tax levied on sale or purchase of foreign currency. I mean tax on foreign currency transactions. Currency transactions, sale or buy. Got it? Tobin tax. Pigovian tax. Pigovian. Pigovian tax is a tax levied on negative externalities. Externality matlab the impact of a person's action on the bystander. So whatever we do would not only have an impact on you and me, like our interaction, it also has some impact on the society, people surrounding us. Am I right? You acquiring knowledge, don't you think it adds value to the society? So our interaction in this class is having a positive externality. But you smoking in public area is having a negative externality. Yes or no? Smoking as such in India is not prohibited, but smoking in public places is prohibited. Am I right? Yes or no? In your private space, you could smoke a number of cigarettes because it's already been clear. Smoking kills. Smoking causes cancer. But your money and it's your lungs. TK, chalta. I don't have a problem. But you don't have a right to screw up someone else's lungs. Am I right? Passive smoking is equally bad. That's the reason. It's your money, your lungs, TK chalta, but you're not supposed to cause any negative impact on the people surrounding. So that's a negative externality. Your actions would have an impact, negative impact on the bystander. That's a negative externality. In order to disgrace such negative externalities, there is a tax proposed called Pigovian tax, named after a person by name A.C. Pigo. Got it? That's a Pigovian tax. Like I said, in a good example, European carbon border adjustment mechanism. What is the intention behind it? Is to discourage production of carbon intensive goods. Got it? Following? Yes. Got it? Okay. So as of now, we don't. Okay, Australia once upon a time has imposed a tax called carbon tax. That tax is in proportion to carbon footprint. Carbon footprint has been the amount of carbon dioxide, the tons of carbon dioxide released by a firm in a given period of time. Pigovian tax. Direct or indirect? Tax on your interest income. Interest tax. Tax on your interest income. ARB. Okay. Fringe benefit tax. Fringe benefit does mean fringe benefits. Huh? No, generally, fringe benefits. Okay, benefits provided by the employer to the employee. Anything other than mostly in the form of salary, like a gym, free transportation, a holiday. Any extra benefits that accrues to the employee is what we call a fringe benefit. Got it? I guess, okay, I hope you understand all of these taxes, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So now, in case if it comes to your mind, I think I don't need to explain what's GST, VAT, isn't it? Right? What does VAT stand for? Okay. And GST? And how is the VAT and GST is different? Generally it is said the GST, this is so-called indirect tax. GST, a comprehensive, uniform, indirect tax. And it is said the major indirect tax reform after independence is GST. How is GST different from VAT? And what do you really think these taxes tends to address? Is GST is a new tax that you're paying beyond existing taxes? No. Right, since I said it's a comprehensive indirect tax that subsumes majority of the existing indirect taxes. Not only that subsumes majority of the existing taxes levied by state, center and local governments, it is also going to be a uniform tax across the country, right? Yes. But how is a VAT different from GST? Or how is GST different from VAT? VAT only on goods. By state. Okay. So are you guys paying in state of Telangana both VAT and GST? Are you guys now paying both VAT and GST? VAT ka pehle, is there any tax? VAT basically tax, let's say he says VAT is a tax on goods. Okay. So VAT, VAT has been introduced in most of the states somewhere in 2005. Iska pehle there was no tax on what? Okay. Yeah, it's a sales tax that has been replaced by VAT. When there is already a tax by sales tax, what's the point of coming again with a tax? There is already a sales tax. And he said that sales tax is replaced by VAT. So by that logic, you just simply change the name. Am I right? Is that only a change in the nomenclature or is there any change in the way the tax is computed? Yes, VAT basically stands for value added tax. VAT is a multi-point or a multi-stage tax levied in proportion to the value addition at each and every stage. If you look at sales tax, that's levied on the final good, price, final price. But if every time you levy tax on the final price, okay, what happens? The tax that is being paid in the previous stage would also end up being part of your tax base. Yes or no? Because there is a commodity you purchased on which you paid tax. You added value, you sold it. And there is again a tax levied on it, on the final price of the good. Then what happens? The tax would be levied on the value addition and also on the tax paid in the previous stages. So, and that results in cascading effect of taxes, which results in increasing the average tax burden, makes the price of goods and services too costly, people cannot afford it. So if the price goes too high, the overall consumption would reduce. Am I right? And how do you overcome this? In fact, this is what we call cascading effect of taxes. And how do you overcome this? And that is the reason why people have come with an alternative, a solution called value added tax. So value added tax is a multi-stage or a multi-point tax levied not on final price, rather it's levied on value addition. What do you mean by value addition? How would you define the term value addition? Yes. So value addition refers to value enhancement. Okay. So generally you might be having a perception, I buy raw materials and simply convert raw materials into finished product like a pen. Is there any value addition? Is there any value addition? I own a company that produces this stencil, but I don't produce everything from scratch. What my company does, simply buys the raw material from the market. And I just simply transform these raw materials into a finished good, that's the stencil. Is there value addition? Yes. Am I right? Now imagine that gentleman is the one who is into the business of distribution of this stencil. Because the company doesn't directly sell it in the market. So he is a distributor of these stencils. He buys it from a factory and distributes to various retail outlets, a wholesale dealer of these stencils. Is that gentleman adding value? He buys the stencils from me and that's the stencil he sells it to a retail outlet. Is that gentleman adding any value? Is that gentleman adding any value? Why do you think you're not adding any value? Because it's the same product you're buying and same product you're selling to retailer. Is that what's the mean? No. Value addition doesn't mean that transforming some X into Y. Value addition, just now I said, any value enhancement during any stage. Right? How are you enhancing value? This simple. In the absence of you, people like me has to walk to the factory to buy this stencil. Am I right? It is you who happens to take the pain of buying it from the factory and bringing it to the retail markets. And it costs you money. Hey, say, you need to spend money on transportation, packaging, storage, warehouse, labor. Am I right? And don't you really think all these services that you provide, all the expenses you incur to bring this pencil from factory to the retail outlet in the local market is a value enhancement? Yes or no? Right? Let's suppose you run a pub. You buy a beer from the factory. Right? And you sell the same beer to the consumer, retail, isn't it? At a very high price. But the same beer of the same company in a retail mart is available at a different price. Why is the same product being traded at different prices? Because in your place, you do offer that beer with some extra enhancement. What is it? Huh? Yes. Isn't it? So the value enhancement is more by you. Why? You provide a live music, DJ. Isn't it? Okay. Yes. And kuch galat isn't? I mean, anything goes bad, you also have the bouncers there. Isn't it? And in a posh locality, you're just providing me a place to sit, hang on with my friends and drink. But that's not what the retailer provides to me. Isn't it? And that's the reason you have a right to collect more money than the guy who's selling the drink. Right? Value enhancement. Value addition does mean value enhancement. Don't ever think you should just simply try, okay, because the same beer you're buying, it is what you're serving. You're not adding some sugar salt to it. You're just providing it in a different form. Right? But you're not changing the substance. Am I right? Yes or no? Don't ever think the same Kingfisher beer that's been sold in a pub is more sweeter, more salty. Okay, no, it's the same. But then why do you charge me an extra penny? Because you are adding more value. In what way? You yourself asked about it. So now the wholesaler who buys it from the factory and brings it to the retail market, is he adding value? Yes. And the retailer who buys it from the wholesaler and sells it to the consumer, is he adding value? Yes. But he has to rent a space. Isn't it? Yes or no? Isn't it? And he has to display it. Right? Following. And he also has to have some people to hire. Okay, he has to hire so that it could help people buying goods and services. Adding value. Got it? So value enhancement. Value, okay, before a good is being sold is the value addition. And when it comes to VAT, unlike the previous sales tax, it's a tax levied at every stage of value addition in proportion to the value addition. So that being the reason, the tax computed using VAT would result in reducing tax burden. But since the previous tax is being computed on the final price, that results in a cascading effect of taxes, which results in increase in price of final goods and services. Whereas VAT method brings down the tax burden. So that's how the sales tax has been replaced with VAT. But since sales tax being a state subject, the VAT might differ from one state to other state. Then how do you bring any uniformity? Beyond the sales tax, we do also have multiple indirect taxes. Entertainment tax, luxury tax, excise duty, central excise duty, special excise duty, customs duty, central sales tax. Sales tax is an intrastate sale of goods. Central sales tax is an interstate sale of goods, one state to other state. There's been again n number of indirect taxes. And that's why the government thought, why not create a uniformity and come with a comprehensive tax? Rather than n number of taxes, let's simply impose one tax, uniform across the country. I mean, the rate would be uniform across the country. Got it? And that simply subsumes all existing indirect taxes. So simplifying the entire indirect tax structure, that's it. Results in increase in tax complaints. Filing tax returns is also very easy. Yes or no? And creates a uniform market across the country. That means a product would be traded at a uniform price across the country if the tax levied is uniform across the country. Am I right? That's the very basic essence of GST. Understood? Okay. So now I hope you understand. Okay, the tax revenue could be a direct tax revenue or indirect tax, and I have given so many examples. Any doubt? Yes. So now give me some examples of a non-tax revenue. Non-tax revenue. Yes? Okay. Fines, penalty, user charges, both are TK. Because you people have this habit of jumping signals, isn't it? TK. इसके अलावा कुछ और बोल दो. Okay. And right, let's say if a state pays the interest on the loans it borrows, interest payments made by the states. Can I just place it here? Interest payment. Interest payment is a recurring or non-recurring? You are the state, you borrowed money from me and you're liable to pay interest on the loans borrowed. Recurring or non-recurring? Recurring. Receipt or expenditure to me? Receipt. To you? I report as my revenue receipt. You report as your expenditure. What expenditure? Revenue or capital expenditure? Revenue expenditure. But if you repay the loan, where would you report it? If you repay the loan, yes, you report as a capital expenditure, and that loan I record from you. Where do I report? Sarji, you paid the principal. That is the receipt or expenditure to me. Receipt. Revenue or capital? Yes. So the interest payment paid by the state is revenue receipt, but the loan repaid by state is capital receipt. Very good. Am I right? Do you understand? Yes. Let's suppose, okay, let me say dividend. Dividend simply does mean the part of profits. Okay, dividend paid by PSUs, public sector undertakings. In this case, central public sector undertakings. Got it? Because every organization that I have invested in, again, if it makes some profits, part of profit is shared back to the owner of the company. So since this I referred to central public sector undertaking, that means it's a central government owned undertakings like ONGC, HPCL. Owner being the government, they would end up sharing some part of profits with the master. And can I include this part of non-tax revenue? Yes or no? Isn't it? But अगर मैंने ये बेच दिया, I happen to sell the ONGC. Proceeds from disinvestment. Where do you want me to place it? Profits on the company, I report as a non-tax revenue, but I thought of selling the company itself. Capital receipts. So proceeds from disinvestment. Proceeds from a disinvestment. Very good. Isn't it? I hope you understand. Okay. So इसके अलावा other than this, can you give me any other example of capital receipt? Other than loans repaid by states and disinvestment proceeds. Just now you yourself happens to point out, right, borrowings. Where do you want me to place it? Capital receipt. Isn't it? Yes. So that's it. Now if you look at, this is how, okay, receipts serve the budget. So I have just, okay, the finance minister has divided it into a pie chart, and she's simply showing you out of every 1 rupee that goes to Conserved Fund of India, what contributes to the Conserved Fund of India. I mean, 1 rupee. Where does rupee come from? So you would be noticing the fact the major chunk of rupee, 24 paisa out of every 1 rupee is in the form of borrowings and any other liabilities. I mean either selling bonds or by simply borrowing against a small savings or public account. 24 paise. Isn't it? And then, so now let me see quickly. Okay, tell me what. Now, can you further classify them into revenue receipt and taxes? Corporate tax, revenue or capital receipt? Yes, revenue receipt and a direct tax. Am I right? Yes or no? And then income tax, 22 paise. Isn't it? Revenue and a direct tax. This revenue and indirect tax. Union excise duty, revenue and indirect tax. And then GST, revenue and indirect tax. Non-tax receipt, just now I referred, non-tax receipt has been interest payments made by states, not borrowing, sir. Okay, right, dividend payments, okay, user charges, fines, blah, blah, blah. So that's it, revenue, but not a tax. And then the borrowing and other liabilities, isn't it? Then what do you mean non-debt capital receipt? I've given you some examples of capital receipt. Isme, what do you think considered non-debt capital receipt? I have given you 3 examples. Proceeds from disinvestment. Is it a debt creating or non-debt creating receipt? Loan repaid by the state. That's it. So rather than writing it, she has mentioned it as a non-debt creating capital receipt. Of course, I am just using the word income, but that's not appropriate. Money you just simply make by selling an asset cannot be called as an income, right? Yes or no? Income is something we generally regularly earn, right? But just to make things simple, right? Because anything that you make by selling assets or by working hard, the money or income is a wage you earn. You don't need to pay back. So the non-debt creating capital asset, the proceeds from disinvestment. You happen to sell your asset that you own and made some money. The state borrowed money and repaid the principal. That's what it is. So, if you look at as of now, the revenue receipt to capital receipt, what's the ratio? Yes or no? Because this 24 paise, this 1 paise together is a capital receipt. Baki is a, rest is a revenue receipt. Am I right? So, the revenue receipt to capital receipt ratio is 75 to 25. As of now. So, within revenue receipt, so look at the tax revenue to non-tax revenue. What's the basically, okay, tax revenue to non-tax revenue? What's the ratio? Huh? No, out of the revenue receipt, what simply is the major chunk? 75, okay, let's suppose 75 rupees is the total revenue receipt. Total 75 may non-tax revenue is around 9. Isn't it? That's roughly around 10-12%. Am I right? 75 rupees may 9 out of 75 is roughly around 12. Okay, let's say 15%. Let's say 15. Isn't it? So the major share of revenue receipt is tax revenue. You accept it? Out of, okay, total receipts, revenue receipts, okay, isn't it? Contribute 75%. Within revenue receipt, what contributes more? Tax revenue. Within tax revenue, what contributes more? Direct or indirect taxes? Direct or indirect taxes? Huh? Direct. You tell me ideally, what should contribute more to the tax revenue? Direct taxes or indirect taxes? Ideally speaking, if you are the king, isn't it? What do you really think you should rely on? More on direct taxes, more on indirect taxes. So what should contribute more to the tax revenue? Direct taxes or indirect taxes? A or B? A. What's wrong with B? Huh? Yes, because direct taxes are non-inflationary. Yes or no? Whereas indirect taxes are inflationary. Rise in indirect tax results in rise in prices. And moreover, direct taxes is basically, if you look at direct taxes, it's a tax levied on the people who could afford to pay. Not everyone has to bear the burden of direct taxes. But indirect taxes, the burden is universal. Yes or no? And this is they would have a regressive effect. More poor you are, the more burden is on you. Isn't it? Yes or no? Because either you pay the, okay, you buy the beer or someone else, okay, Ambani buys the beer, both gonna pay the same excise duty. But in comparison to the money Mr. Ambani makes and the money you makes, look at the tax component, isn't it? You make 100 rupees and you end up paying 80 rupees tax. Got it? So the guy who buys the same good would also pay the same tax of 80 rupees, but in comparison to the income that gentleman makes, the rich, their tax burden is very minimal. Am I right? So in fact, when you buy the same good, the rich, the poor has to pay the same tax, but when it comes to the poor, isn't it? In comparison to his income, the burden is more. You accept it. So you say indirect taxes are regressive. More or less, they are basically inflationary. So if you are the king, it doesn't make sense relying more on indirect taxes. Rather, you should rely more on direct taxes. So you should, okay, isn't it, concentrate, or you should be coming with such kind of policies where your policies would result in making every person Ambani, and then expect these Ambanis to contribute for the sake of welfare of people, rather than making every person like the Mukesh in the movie, and then extracting money from them. Rather, you should concentrate on making every person like Mukesh Ambani. You accept it? That's it. The king ideally has to, isn't it? Isn't it? Focus on making people more rich, rather than simply penalizing rich in the name of distributing that money back to the poor people. That being the reason, 3 days back, okay, you might have come across this saying of Mr. Narayana Murthy, Infosys. He said, no country has ever become rich or developed by simply distributing freebies. So no. So as a leader, you should focus on generating more wealth rather than distributing wealth. No country ever becomes rich country by simply distributing wealth, right? So no. Rather, you should just focus more on concentration of wealth. So direct taxes levied based on the ability to pay principle. But whereas indirect taxes, universal burden, regressive effect, inflationary nature. Am I clear now? Yes. So this is how rupee comes. Understood? Yes. But now let's make it, okay, let me ask you a simple question. Do you think every penny, because I guess you know the fact, in India, who has the right to levy taxes? Huh? Only Union Government India levy taxes? Huh? State governments also have a right to levy taxes. What are local governments? Give me one tax local government levies in India. Huh? Octroi. Octroi duty? Okay. Professional tax. Who levies professional tax? Let's say property tax. Property tax. Who levies a property tax? I mean property tax. Who do you pay? Let's say you have property in Hyderabad. Who do you pay the property tax to? To GHMC or to Mr. Revendra Reddy? I mean state of Telangana. Huh? Yes. Land tax. Tax on the land. Panchayat mein, isn't it? If you own land, basically the panchayat do collect some money. Am I right? Yes. So at least I guess you realize the fact that union has a right to levy taxes. States also have a right to levy some taxes. Even local government also have a right to levy some taxes. But who basically decides who has a right to levy a particular tax and who could collect it and how is going to appropriate it? It's a constitution. We have clear-cut separation of powers, right? So it's not like randomly, okay, I would not say, is Sal, you would levy tax, next year I am going to collect the tax. I am going to levy tax. Isn't it? This has been clearly demarcated. Levy, collection, appropriation. Now take the case of income tax. Okay, so who in India has a right to levy income tax and who collects it? Union, state or local governments? Union. Tax on agricultural income hai to? Tax on agricultural income. Let's suppose the income. Tax on personal income. Who has a right to levy tax it? Who has a right to collect tax on personal income? Union. Just now we have seen the finance minister happens to say 4 lakh tak exempted, 4 to 8 we have slabs. But if the income is in the form of agricultural income, tax on agricultural income, who has a right to levy or tax on it? It's a state government. The tax is on agricultural income. The right to levy tax on agricultural income is the state government. That's a previous question. Got it? But as of now, No state has the audacity, because no farmer in India has the ability for that matter. I mean, I'm referring to genuine farmers. Of course, there are many part-time farmers in India who are really minting crores of rupees of money by cultivating brinjal, potato and tomato. But the actual farmers in India, maybe you are aware of the fact, according to National Crime Records Bureau, one farmer commits suicide for every 45 minutes in this country. We are proud that we are fifth largest economy. But actual farmers I'm referring to, they're falling in debt trap. I'm not speaking about the part-time farmers. Right? Many of you might be aware of the fact there are some part-time farmers who are reporting crores of rupees of money by cultivating bell peppers, okay, brinjal and all these things. Isn't it? Yes. So now if you look at the right to levy, collection, appropriation, everything has been clearly defined and demarcated. It's not like pinky ponky, father has a donkey, this time I'll collect it, tomorrow, okay, next year, it's going to be your choice. Isn't it? Yes. So now, as you said, income tax is a tax union government levies, and who collects it? Income tax. Union itself collects it. Isn't it? Similarly, corporate tax. Who levies? Union. Who collects it? Okay. So, TK. So, the union levies a tax and also takes the money from the people, either in the form of corporate tax or in the form of income tax. Do you really think the union is going to keep all the money for itself? Does the union has a right to keep all the money for itself? No. Isn't it? It is supposed to. It is supposed to, and it's mandatory, isn't it, to share certain part of the tax proceeds with the states. Am I right? Yes or no? Yes. And that is basically based on, and that's what's based on the Finance Commission recommendations. The Finance Commission recommendations. Have you heard about Finance Commission? Yes or no? It's a statutory body, executive body, or a constitutional body? Huh? Finance Commission. Which article refers to Finance Commission? 280. 280 refers to the Finance Commission, Central Finance Commission. So whatever I'm saying, okay, just now is all the tax revenue. Where does it get credited into? Consolidated Fund of India. Am I right? Isn't it? And the union doesn't collect money only in the form of taxes, because out of this Consolidated Fund of India, yeah. So look at all receipts do gets credited into Consolidated Fund of India. And leaving aside, we have discussed that a significant part of it is in the form of tax revenue, which could be classified into direct taxes and indirect taxes. But other than this, there is other source of income to government, which is also very regular. That is cess and then surcharge. I guess you understand the difference, right? Yes. And this entire revenue in the form of taxes plus cess and surcharge is what we call gross tax revenue. We call it a gross tax revenue. Got it? And as of now, it is mandatory for the government to share certain part of this tax proceeds. Certain part of this tax proceeds based on the recommendations of Finance Commission. Based on the recommendations of Finance Commission. It doesn't mean that you are supposed to share all of your receipts into Consolidated Fund of India. The union is obliged to share proceeds from its what we call net tax revenue. Net tax revenue. So what is net tax revenue? Comprised of only the money collected in the form of taxes, excluding cess and surcharge. And this net tax revenue of the union government is what we call as a divisible pool of revenue. Divisible pool. That means this is the money that goes into this pool is what the union is obliged to share with the states. based on the recommendations of Finance Commission. Got it? So not every penny that gets credited to Consolidated Fund of India is what the union is obliged to share with the states. Okay, so that is further divided into, okay, so I mean part of the Consolidated Fund of India consists of gross tax revenue, which includes all taxes, direct, indirect, plus cess and surcharge. Within the gross tax revenue, excluding cess and surcharge, whatever you left is what we call net tax revenue, and that constitutes the divisible pool of revenue of the union. And every penny that goes into divisible pool of revenue, the union is obliged to share with the states. It's an obligation. But what part of this net tax revenue you are supposed to share is based on the recommendations of Finance Commission, and the recommendations of Finance Commission are not binding. Got it? And right now, what's the Finance Commission recommendations we are implementing? It is the 15th Finance Commission recommendations. And I think you already know the fact the government has already set up the 16th Finance Commission. Who is the chairman of 16th Finance Commission? So when was the last time you happened to touch or opened a newspaper? Stone Age, Copper Age, Bronze Age. And who is the chairman of 15th Finance Commission? ISCA recommendation is what we are right now being implemented. Until 26th, these recommendations holds good. So it is the Finance Commission that makes the recommendation about vertical devolution. Vertical devolution has been what part of this net tax revenue has to be shared with these states. So this is what we call vertical devolution. As of now, it's around 41%. So that's what the 15th Finance Commission recommended. And the government of India accepted. Okay, I'm going to share 41% of my net tax revenue, divisible pool with the states. Based on the recommendations of Finance Commission, they recommended 41% and the union accepted it. So what should be the percentage? The vertical devolution has been what part of this net tax revenue the union is obliged, is expected to share with the states is what is Finance Commission recommends. And this is what we call vertical devolution. Now let's say out of every 100 bucks that goes into net tax revenue, the union shares 41 rupees with the states. Is this 41 rupees going to be distributed equally among the states? Does it make sense dividing all this money equally among all states? No. No. I think most of you, at least since you come from the state Telangana, many a times your state finance ministers, especially almost all southern finance ministers, keeps on reporting or complaining the same. The union collects more amount of money, or the tax revenues mobilized from our states is very huge. When it comes to devolution of the same tax revenue, we receive pennies. Do you think it's a rational and a logical argument? So you mean to say since your state contributes more to the total tax revenue, you mean to say an equal percentage of that money has to be given back to you? And you think it's a valid and a rational argument? TK, let's take that as rational and valid. Tomorrow, if the people of Hyderabad, because most of the revenue collected in the state of Telangana is from the state of Hyderabad. Now, if Hyderabadi people demand the same thing, since the most of the tax is collected from Hyderabad, then the money should be paid only to the people of Hyderabad. Even that's rational. Am I right? And if you even accept it, then people of Banjara Hills say the same thing. Most of the revenue collected within the state, city of Hyderabad is from the rich and affluent people living in Banjara Hills. Then, wo to paisa hum ke liye paise. Then comes the argument. Right? Allu Arjun is the highest taxpayer in the entire film industry. Then you would say the same thing. Isn't it? Because we started with the basic logic. Tax, basically the idea of taxation is to redistribute income. Isn't it? As per your logic, collect more tax money from the rich and give the same money back to the rich. What's the point? The very basic essence of tax is to redistribute income. You yourself said, beta, 41 rupees, should it be divided equally among all people, all states? You said no, right? Then what is your argument? The one who contributed more should be given more. No, right? That's it. You guys getting it? In fact, though the leaders do happen to keep on criticizing, and don't ever think it is randomly decided by the finance minister. Don't ever think that every time, every month, every quarter, the tax money collected by the finance minister is what she is going to distribute as per her discretion. No. Everything is automated and everything is based upon certain principles that have been agreed with proper consultations. Like I said, 16th Finance Commission already has been set up by the government last year. And they are supposed to submit their recommendations by consulting all stakeholders. The same thing what 15th Finance Commission has done. And every Finance Commission is being given a terms of reference. What are the common terms of reference out of the total tax revenue you collect? Tell me what part of it you expect me to share with the states. That's one term of reference. And this is a vertical devolution. And how am I going to distribute to the states? Horizontal devolution. And that is also not at the discretion of union. That's also based on the Finance Commission recommendations. And how come the Finance Commission make that recommendations? With consultation of the stakeholders. And that stakeholder is none other than your state. Like many a times we will be come across this, okay, GST levied, isn't it? Around some 2-3 months back, the GST on caramel popcorn. People started creating a lot of memes on the Union Finance Minister. Do you really think the Union Finance Minister, Madam Nirmala Sitharaman alone can impose GST or alter GST? Do you really think so? Do you really think so? No, right? And who happens to make decisions related to GST? Okay, change in GST rate, keeping an item out of the purview of GST, bringing something into the purview of GST. Who do you think can legislate on it? Huh? Not Finance Commission, it's a GST Council. GST Council. Isn't it? And every decision within the GST Council is taken based on voting. The states have 2/3 of voting rights. The union has 1/3 of the voting rights. And any decision to be implemented, you need 75% majority. 3/4 of voting is required. 3/4? Alright, 75% majority. So that means the union unilaterally cannot simply change the GST or cannot simply bring something out of the purview of GST. Cannot bring something into the purview of GST. It only has 1/3 of voting rights. All states together, without a consent from the state, cannot make any changes in GST. Since the GST has been being implemented 17 to this point of time, every GST Council resolution is anonymous. Majority of them. Anonymous does mean 100% of the stakeholders accepted for every decision. So does mean this issue of popcorn, the tax, it's not basically idea of union government alone. The states themselves accepted it. And हमारे देश में for political reasons people could speak anything, and I don't want you to be carried away with what your politician says. And especially if you're preparing civil services by simply watching reels in Instagram, God save the country. Okay. Generally it is said, na, if you don't read newspaper, you are uninformed. If you read newspaper, you are misinformed. But it is rather being misinformed rather than uninformed, because you are qualified enough to understand what is fake news, what is being said with a pure political motive. Am I right? That's something you should be able to figure out. That's your responsibility. Isn't it? But don't ever simply end up buying the logic of every politician who happens to speak in the public. They are politicians and they have a fundamental right to speak lies. Isn't it? Yes. So don't get carried away with it. Okay? So now when it comes to the horizontal devolution, that is again decided based on the Finance Commission recommendations. So it does mean the union government, Madam Nirmala Sitharaman, just because her party is in power in UP, cannot offer more of the tax revenue to UP state because both the union and state governments happens to be of the same party. No way. It's based on certain priorly accepted formula and principle. And that particular recommendation made by Finance Commission with consultation from all stakeholders. Isn't it? Yes. So the vertical devaluation is this 41%. But is it going to be shared equally among all states? No. That is based on, again, the recommendations, and we call this distribution as horizontal devaluation. And as of now, remember I said it's the 15th Finance Commission recommendations are being implemented. Okay, and how is it distributed? Based upon this criteria. This is the criteria. So this criteria is what the Finance Commission, these three parameters is based on the criteria of need. The states with more population, with more forest cover, more area are in need of more money. So this is the based on criteria of need. Income distance does mean just, okay, look at the top performing state, income of the state, GSDP. Arrange the states in the descending order of GSDP. So the distance between the best performing or the state with high income to state with, okay, isn't it? So income distance. The one who happens to far away from the best performing state is more backward. He is making less income. Am I right? And they deserve more, because at the end of the day, the purpose of taxation is to redistribute income. More poor the state, more is the support it requires. Am I right? So the second criteria of income distance is based on equity principle. And these two based upon performance criteria. Performance, certain performance does mean whoever brings in certain initiatives to stabilize population growth. And then whoever happens to put an extra effort to increase tax revenue, they should be incentivized. So these two parameters indicate are on performance criteria. This is on equity criteria, and these three on need-based criteria. And each and every parameter has been given a weightage. And it is based upon this weightage, each and every state gets the allocations, which is automated. So iska matlab every month she doesn't simply compute the math and simply keeps crediting into their account, simply calling them chief minister sab aapka AFSC account and bank okay, account number based do, I am going to distribute it. No, it is automated based on this criteria. So the government cannot apply any discretion, simply saying you and me belong to the same party. इसी वजह से मैं आपको ज़्यादा पैसा देता हूँ. It doesn't happen. Then you might be asking, how dare the Finance Commission comes with this? Because this is being suggested based upon a consultation with the states. Got it? So it does mean that you have no right to complain, and whatever is the complaint from the states is for a pure political motive. That's it. Understood? This is how it's distributed. Any doubt? Okay. So now let me see. So we have seen this. Okay, you answered this question, right? Capital budget. We'll come to the expenditure part, but let me see. Okay, let's complete the questions related to taxation. Yes. Forest. Because the state's having more forest cover. Don't you think it has to protect? You require more money. That's the reason. Okay, area. State with more area incurs more administrative expenses. More population incurs more administrative expenses. More forest cover also has to incur more expenses. So, इसी वजह से I call those three parameters as need-based. They need more money. Isn't it? So, like I said, the Finance Commission is given certain terms of reference. What are the terms of reference? Sirji, you make me suggestions or recommendations, okay, with respect to the criteria I should follow to share the tax proceeds, okay, from me to the states. And how should I allocate among the states? And I want you to make the criteria. That too with consultation of stakeholders. What are the stakeholders? Myself, states together. Because imagine you only consult states, and state says we want all the tax money, and the Finance Commission put forth a proposal, they want 100% of tax revenue, then how the hell am I going to run my government? So consult all stakeholders and give me the criteria. So in the 14th Finance Commission ka, I think you might have seen this. Criteria is different. 15th is different. Got it? Understood? That's how things work. Any doubt? Yes. So answer this question. A redistribution of income. Yes, any doubt? A progressive taxation with the, what is a progressive? The one who needs more has to be supported more. Am I right? Yes or no? Yes. Progressive does mean, okay, what is a progressive? More is the money you make, more is the tax you are liable to pay. Income tax. Is everyone paying the same amount of, okay, same proportion of his income as a tax to the government? No. The tax liability of an individual varies based upon the income you are making, right? That's a progressive. Increase in your income, increase in your tax penalty. Progressive. The same. Progressive does mean the one who needs more. Who needs more expense? Who needs more support? The more poor you are, the more is the support the government has to provide to you, right? Isn't it? Yes or no? That's what I'm saying. To the one who deserves more, the state has to support more. Equity matlab. What's the difference between equality and equity? Equality does mean just give, okay, same chocolate to everyone. Equity matlab give more chocolates to the one who is more hungry. Got it? So when the government, when the states make some spending, don't you really think to bring in equity, the state has to support the poor, spend more for the welfare of poor than compared to the rich or the middle class. Am I right? And that is a progressive spending. And collect money from the one who makes more money. And that's a progressive taxation. That's it. But generally when it comes to taxes, it could be progressive nature. More is the money people make, more is the tax they are liable to pay. Or proportional. Proportional as means it doesn't matter how much money you make, I want 30%. Proportional, irrespective of your income. 100 rupees kamate hai, 100 crore kamate hai, doesn't matter, I just want 40% of your income. Proportional. The other structure could be regressive. Regressive matlab? Okay, simply more money you make, less tax I want you to pay. So you think it's crazy idea, but the very basic intention is to incentivize the hard working. So the government itself saying, better Deepika, right? Make more money. More is the money you make, more is the money you could keep. So don't take rest. Then keep working. Incentivize. Because only when the rich like her works, isn't it? Right? Some money, I mean the wealth gets generated, do percolates. Am I right? Yes or no? Isn't it? Rather than simply taking all the money that Mr. Chiranjeevi makes or Allu Arjun makes, we should incentivize them to make more movies. Am I right? Yes or no? Because if you say, just imagine Allu Arjun. Okay, so if you just tell this gentleman, Are bhai dekho, okay, in a year if you ever make more than 5 crores, any penny that you make beyond 5 crores, I'm going to take it in the form of tax. So we all know the fact he gets paid remuneration more than 5 crores. Ek hi movie mein he get paid. So if he just goes for second movie, look at the effort, time, risk, everything remains the same. But for the remuneration he gets paid second movie, pura paisa government is taking. In such case, he thinks, why should I? He sits at home, plays with his kids. So he is not at loss. The reason is, even though he works, he gets paid a decent remuneration, the government is going to take it the money. So he doesn't work. He has no incentive to work. And for him, not a big deal. Oh, already has 5 crore rupees for the first movie. But what's the problem? Look at the industry. The light man, the stunt boy, the makeup artist. Am I right? The entire industry, because there have been hundreds and people, thousands of people who are working on these big stars working. Am I right? Yes or no? Isn't it? Rather imagine if this state itself happens to provide incentive. Sir, more is the money you make, less is the tax you're liable to pay, then definitely every star would work overnight. Yes or no? Whether they happens to give the hit movie, flop movie, doesn't matter. Let the industry, kuch kaam chal raha hai. Isn't it? Yes or no? That's it. So incentivize the rich. Incentivize people work hard. More money you make, more money you keep. So discourage or disincentive people being lazy. Got it? Following? That's the idea. So, but in general, most of the tax in India, either corporate tax, income tax, they are progress. More is the money you make, more is your liability. Understood? That's it. Huh? Yes. Who levies, who collects, and okay, appropriation has been how does it gets distributed? I said there are three different aspects in taxation: levy, collection, appropriation. So, like I said, not all the tax money the union collects is what the union going to keep it for itself. It does share with the states. So, how is it going to be appropriate? Who decides with respect to income tax? Income tax. Giving, okay, see, out of the options, where did the finance commission, sir, isme? Okay, you are supposed to choose one among the four. Huh? Yes, very good. When would there be a capital gains? Capital gains arise. I hope you understand. I explained about a capital gains tax. Capital gains has been gains realized on liquidation of an asset. You buy an asset, you buy a land at 10 crores, sell it at 20 crores. आपको gain मिला? Right? Yes. So, given these three transactions, what might result in capital gains tax? Yes? Let's say you own the factory that produces this pencil. The money you make by selling this pencil, revenue receipt or capital receipt? How do you classify this receipt? Money you make by selling this pencil, revenue or capital receipt? Revenue, recurring. The money you're selling the factory. Understood now? Am I right? Let's say you are a painter by profession. You just simply make, okay, paints to make money. You're painter by profession. The money you make by selling paints, revenue or capital? Let's say you happen to, okay, somehow you got, okay, painting of Picasso. Isn't it? Some dumb fellow doesn't understand the value of it, happened to throw it in garbage can, and you picked it and you sold it in an auction house. Made $1 million. The money you make by selling this Picasso painting, revenue receipt, capital receipt. Huh? Why? Because you're not Picasso. At least you understand that. Okay? Yes. Got it now? So, does this result in capital gains? No, right? Second, when there is a natural increase in value of property owned, yes or no? You buy a share, value of share increased, you sold it, you realize gains. It could be a financial asset or a physical asset. Am I right? When you purchase a painting and there's a growth, of course, that's what we discussed now. Then, corporate tax. Who levies corporate tax? Union, state, local governments. That's it. Given four, okay, what are the indirect taxes? Direct or indirect tax? This, indirect. This, direct. This, indirect. So how many? 2. What are they? 2 and 4. Huh? Service tax. Just, okay, forget about it. Anyway, we have GST now. Okay, isn't it? But this is a question prior to 17. And we are revising questions, all previous questions. See what I just say. But still, forget about it. But in general, service tax, direct or indirect tax? Indirect. GST? वो तो ये तो ठीक है चलता है. Enough. Sales tax. What's the card? Okay, what's the right answer in the context of sales tax? Huh? B. Bangalore or Delhi? Very good. दो साल का पहले this is the question. Consider the following. 2023 में. 23 का paper is the most toughest. Paper 1, paper 2 दोनों है ना in GS. Okay, prelims में. Because 23 का पहले, even 24 they have come to this practice. Generally, 10-15 questions is where you would have these options. 1, 2, 3 correct, 3, 4 correct, where you could just use this logic of eliminate. But 23 paper में, the option to eliminate itself has been eliminated. Rather than saying 2, 3 correct, 1, 2, 4 correct, they said 2 are correct, 3 are correct, 4 are correct. Made it difficult. So you tell me. Just now I happen to show this picture. Okay, एक बार ये देखो. If you still have a look at this is the 14th का. Ignore it. 15th का देखो. Fast. And then answer this. Because I already discussed it. Huh? Tax and fiscal efforts. Stable government. Huh? Did you find? No. Governance reforms? No. Forest and ecology? Yes. Demography performance? Yes. Kitna? 3 or 5? 3. Demography performance. Forest and ecology. Need criteria. Performance criteria. And this is again a performance criteria, isn't it? Right. These two were not a part of it. Am I right? Yes or no? Nowhere been part. That's it. So why is the government more worried about black money? Black money matlab kya hai? How do you define black money? Income not accounted. Don't ever see the money by simply under the table. I mean bribe, drug peddling, extortion. That's not only called black money. In fact, agar imagine if you make money by selling drugs, peddling drugs, can you just file tax returns? In this year, 100 kilo ganja, 200 kilo heroin, 3 kidnaps, 4 extortions, and itna paisa kamaya, ye to no, anyway you cannot file it. Illegal. Right? There could be a legitimate and legal source of money, but people doesn't report it. So any income you don't report. Black money. Why is the government more worried about black money? What could be the most probable reason the government is worried about black money? Yeah, give me an answer. Make it fast better. The more faster you give me the answer, more faster you could leave the class. Else, you need to skip your lunch. Loss of revenue to the due to tax. Basically, the government is more worried. आप क्या कर रहे हैं आपका ब्लैक मनी के साथ ऑटो टीके दैट्स अ सेकेंडरी बट मेरा कंसर्न क्या है यू आर नॉट रिपोर्टिंग यू आर नॉट पेइंग टैक्स दैट्स माय प्राइमरी कंसर्न इसके बाद यू आर डोनेटिंग टू योर पार्टी ओके पॉलिटिकल पार्टी और यू आर सिंपली थ्रोइंग इन गंगा इट डजंट मैटर टू मी बट मेरा प्राइमरी कंसर्न है यू आर नॉट रिपोर्टिंग मेरा टैक्स रेवेन्यू कम हो रहा है राइट दैट्स इट सो डोंट थिंक टू मच okay. So what do you think is an answer? Abhi tak, okay, maybe you might have come across this double taxation avoidance agreements, various tax treaties to incentivize foreign investments. Double taxation does mean, okay, the idea is to avoid taxing same income multiple times. Let's say if I come from US and invest money in your country, India, and the government taxes the profits I report in India. Since the company is from US and the same money taken back to US is again taxed. Discourages movement of foreign capital? Yes or no? Yes. Isn't it? Okay, just imagine. Of course, India, we don't have it. Let's imagine I come from Karnataka. Okay, I come from Bangalore and I have been now teaching in Hyderabad. Let's say. And on the money I paid, imagine, okay, Revant Reddy sab takes some money in the form of tax. Of course, they have no right to take that money because it's income. Income, they cannot tax. But imagine. Let's suppose he collected some money. And I have taken this money. There Siddharami is waiting. Mera paisa ka. Isn't it? That itself discourages people like me to move from one part of this existing state to the others. Am I right? Same thing with a direct investment. If the same income is being taxed multiple times, one at the source where the money is generated, other at the destination where the profits are ultimately reaching, discourages movement of capital. Am I right? And इसी वजह से what do nations do? They make treaties. Agreements, deals, a bilateral treaty. Either you tax at the source or let me tax at the destination, but दोनों मिला के let's not harass this fellow. Double taxation avoidance treaty agreement. India has signed it first and foremost with a country called Mauritius. And is Mauritius in news recently? For what reason? Not Maldives, Mauritius. PM has visited. It also has been to, isn't it, highest civilian honor. Our National Day celebrations, I think, isn't it? And iska naam kya hai? Prime Minister ka naam. He's a person of Indian origin. And our Prime Minister also has given the PAO certificate to him and his wife, Naveen Ramgolu. Around more than 50% of those population are supposed to be people of Indian origin. Okay. So if you look at major chunk of foreign investments do come from Mauritius. Not that it's a very rich country, but we have an agreement. Any income, any investment that comes from Mauritius, non-taxable in India, it's only taxable in Mauritius, and in Mauritius the taxes are very low. It's a tax haven. Okay, that's it. So if time permits, I would explain, but let me see how many of you could answer. This is the last year question. Indirect transfers, remind me, I would explain the concept tomorrow. We have having a less time. Okay, I'll explain if tomorrow, if time permits. Okay, indirect transfers, base erosion, profit shifting. I'm going to share the PPT. If you have any doubt, you could let me know, isn't it? I'm going to be here for next 4 days. What do you mean by base erosion, profit shifting? Basically, it's a very common practice to reduce tax burden. Imagine if I own a company which happens to have presence in 2 different or 3 countries. A multinational company having presence in 3 countries. Isn't it? The same company in 3 different countries. But one country the tax rates, corporate tax 50%, the other country 90%, the other country only 5%. So definitely, since it's the same company having presence in 3 countries, kuch to kar do, where you report more profits in low in tax country, am I right? And report less profit in high taxing country, isn't it? How would you do this? By shifting profits, am I right? From a high taxing country to low taxing country. How do you do it? By eroding the tax base. And that results in eroding a tax base. When I say tax base, does mean whatever is the money on which you are levying a tax. So tax base basically refers to all the transactions, incomes, expenditures, revenue generated, any transaction that is taxable. We call tax base. So my intention is to reduce the tax burden at the end of the day. And how am I going to achieve it? By eroding tax base, by taxable profits. How could I achieve the objective of eroding my tax base? By shifting my profits from a highly taxing nation to a low taxing country. Got it? So eroding tax base by shifting profits. We call it a base erosion and profit shifting. In fact, you are eroding tax base by shifting profits. So ideally it should be written as profit shifting resulting in base erosion, tax base erosion. This is a practice many companies do resort to reduce their tax burden. Maybe you might have come across a case Nokia versus Government of India. Find how, okay, if you have some time, do figure out a case that's going on, a dispute between Nokia versus Government of India, all about BEPS. What's the advantage of GST? Huh? Replace multiple taxes collected with multiple hours will create single market. Very good. Will that drastically reduce the current account deficit? No way. It will enormously increase growth and size of economy of India. Will enable to overtake China in the near future. Huh? It's too much to think about it, right? Yes. Okay. So the rest of it will be discussing it tomorrow. Okay. And the PPT will be shared with you. Got it? So there are certain things that doesn't require an explanation, like some scheme or some initiative to promote a certain activity. So those things, to save your time, I would not be explaining it, but I will be sharing the PPT. Got it? So rest of things that's what the explaining tomorrow in the first of the session we're going to discuss, and we move on to the next topic, inflation and monetary policy. Yes. Hmm. 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 Ah, yes. You're liable to pay. It's as simple as his question is, okay, I'm earning money, I'm paying income tax. And after paying tax, after meeting my expenses, I am left with some money. I invested that money. Let's say you invested that money in stocks. And if that particular shares do earn you dividend, and that dividend income is also taxable. Okay, in the good old days, it used to be levied as a dividend distribution tax. Company itself is liable to deduct a part of your dividend, paying back. Okay, that's been paid to you. But now that dividend is taxable in the hands of the shareholder. Let's say you happen to buy a property and rented it. The rental income is taxable. You deposit in a bank, earning interest. That interest is taxable.
It's okay, but some sort of pensions also their
What do you mean pension? Matlab?
Some one person
Hmm.
after return he
No. See, basic thing is that when it comes to the pension fund or when it comes to any such kind of contributory pension schemes. So generally, okay, there are certain aspects like exempt tax. Does mean, see, when you happen to invest money, the government could tax on it. I mean, like I said, a tax base corresponds to any activity, income, expenses, investments, isn't it? That can be taxable. So if the government wants, okay, it could levy tax at the time of investment. The government could also levy tax when the investment makes money out of it. Isn't it? And the government also has a right to levy tax when you're liquidating that investment. Got it? In this case, let's suppose you're saving money for your future. Part of your income in the form of your, okay, if for your future benefits at the time of retirement, you wanna save money. Again, the government wants, could levy tax. But as of India, that is exempted. Okay, and if that pension fund or that particular, okay, money that you are saving with government regularly earns interest, the interest earnings is also exempted. But when you're just simply withdrawing money on bulk, again, isn't it? If the government wants, it could levy a tax. If the government wants, it could exempt it. Got it? So that's up to the discretion of government. You guys getting it? So exempt tax. Isn't it? So that's up to the government. And whatever the government does, I said, it has to be with the consent of the public. Does mean with the consent of a parliament. So every penny the government collects has to be backed by parliament. That's it. Okay? Got it. That's it. That's for the day. We'll meet tomorrow. Short paid.